Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 3 of the Sharks Avalanche second round series, in which the Sharks managed to win 4-2 and now take a 2-1 series lead. They also happen to take back home ice in this game, as a victory in Denver allows it so that they can only just win the last two games at home at worst, Game 5 and Game 7, and they would be the winners of this series. So that's a great advantage to have back in their own hands, as of course the Avalanche a strong home team, even if they did find themselves on the losing end of this one. And this game started out a lot like last game. The Sharks seemed, I shouldn't say that, as the Avalanche were the better team for the first few minutes of this first period, which is to be expected. This Avalanche team, as I said, very good at home. This is their first game at home in a while, as they haven't played at home since Game 4 of their previous series, and in between that they had Game 5 against the Flames in Calgary, about a week off between series, and then Games 1 and 2 in San Jose. So their fans had been waiting to see their team once again, and so they start off that first period quite well. But as the period goes on, the Sharks manage to pick it up. They get a goal from Couture, they get a goal from Timo Meier, and by the end of the first period it is 2-0 and the Sharks are firmly in control. On to the second period, we have the Avalanche somewhat beginning to bring it back. The Sharks still seem like getting a lot of good chances. The major problem here for the San Jose Sharks, at least early on in this game, is the fact that they hit, by my count, over the entire game, excluding Myers, which was post and in, 5 posts. I don't remember the last time I saw any team, not just the Sharks, hit 5 posts in a single game, and that's just by my count. I definitely not high, as I did count about 5 posts. I might even be low on that count, though. To the credit of the Avalanche, of course, well, not necessarily the credit, but they, I think, hit 2, maybe 3 posts in this game, so both teams some poor luck. But the Sharks could have had multiple goals in that first period, multiple goals in the first 30 minutes, if not for the multiple posts that they did manage to hit. But eventually, in the second period, the Avalanche cut into the lead. It's a Sharks power play, which, by the way, was quite powerless once again tonight, as they're having some issues converting against the Avalanche. I think their only power play goal of the series is the one in the last 10 seconds against the Avalanche last game by Brent Burns, which is not a good look for the Sharks, of course. But Brent Burns makes a terrible pass. It goes to Cole. He passes it up to McKinnon, and then Brent Burns gives too much space to McKinnon. And if there's a player on the Avalanche you don't want to give too much space to, well, it's probably Nathan McKinnon, as he basically snipes it bar and in against Jones, and the Avalanche are within 1. Come third period, the Avalanche, this was probably the only period the Avalanche were playing like the better team. They got a lot of good chances for themselves, and Matt Nieto managed to tie the game, his second game in a row with a goal. It was 2-2, and it looked like with about, 8 or so minutes left, we could be in for some overtime, but Logan Couture had something else to say about that. His second of the game took the lead 3-2 for the Sharks. The Sharks were then doing a decent job killing off the rest of the clock. They were keeping the Avalanche to the outside, which is something they've been doing a lot this series, but Logan Couture, a player who already had 2 goals in this game, ends up taking a penalty in the last few minutes of the game. The Sharks, down a man, end up managing to kill off a huge penalty kill. Their penalty kill has actually been quite solid in this series. I believe they only gave up the 1 power play goal, which was the first power play the Avalanche earned in this entire series, if I'm not mistaken, at the very least. And so it's a huge penalty kill. Some of it was even 6-on-4. And as they're moving out of the zone, Logan Couture from center ice basically manages to put it in the empty net for his first playoff hat trick of his career. And I believe there's some crazy stats that since this decade in the playoffs, Logan Couture is second in terms of goals all time here, only behind Alex Ovechkin for this decade. So a huge stat for Couture. We of course know that he is a big time player, a player who shows up in the playoffs, and his 9 goals now leads the entire playoffs. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones. Another fantastic game from Martin Jones. I thought he was quite good in Game 1. I thought he was pretty solid in Game 2, but I thought he was really good here tonight. Martin Jones just continuing to put up some great efforts here, multiple games in a row, all the way back till Game 5 against the Golden Knights. So now 6 very solid games from Martin Jones. No complaints from me, and this seems to be something that we can now expect from him during these playoffs. There are seemingly no worries. Back in, game 3, game 4, a lot of the times when pucks would come towards the net, I would sort of, I guess you could say, I would get a bit worried. My heart rate would do like a quick skip a beat, you could say, because I never know if Jones was going to make the save or not, because he didn't prove to me that he could make consistent saves like that. But now we're at tonight's game 3, going into game 4. My heart doesn't skip any more beats anymore when it's just a random shot for Martin Jones, because he's just making those very good saves. I mean, no chance on the McKinnon one, just an absolutely perfect shot. This was a rough deflection off of Matt Nieto's, I think, like shin pad, or maybe it was his stick that goes past Jones as well. But otherwise, a very solid game for Martin Jones, as he continues to be a very strong goaltender in the NHL, or in the NHL playoffs for the San Jose Sharks ever since halfway through that Golden Knights series. Next is Logan Couture. Of course, I mentioned him, a hat trick tonight, now leads the playoffs with 9 goals. Just everyone knows how much Couture is a big-time player in the league. In the regular season, there are times where you start to falter a bit on Couture, right? He was signed to an extension of $8 million a year for a player who's putting up around 60-ish points per season. He is the first line center, and he's a decent one at that. But some people might look at that from the outside and say, oh, why would you be paying $8 million for a player of Couture's caliber, a 60-point player, I guess an above average first liner, but he's not an elite first liner. Is he really worth $8 million? Well, his playoff performances from 2016, I believe he was very good in the playoffs as well for the Sharks last season, and now again this season, shows that he is definitely worth $8 million and then some, as Couture is just a great leader for this team when it comes to the playoffs. He's someone who's so clutch, and especially with the Sharks missing Joe Pavelski, who is very clutch in his own right when it comes to the playoffs and just in general. Logan Couture has to step up big, and he manages to do that in this game, and is the main reason why the Sharks managed to actually claim this victory. His goal that made it 3-2 was huge as a momentum swing for the Sharks. Next is Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who doesn't have the perfect record in the games that he has played. As of course, the Sharks did lose to the Avalanche in Game 2, but he continues to be a defensive force for the San Jose Sharks, back to being on the shutdown pairing for the Sharks, playing now with Brent Burns. Brent Burns had over 28 minutes tonight, Vlasic over 24 minutes, so he's definitely being relied on a lot to shut down the McKinnon line, and in tonight's game, he does a solid job at it. McKinnon did get a goal, but that was on the power play, I think shorthanded, or at least in the last second, or maybe as soon as the power play expired. But otherwise at even strength with McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen, a line that again had to be reunited because they didn't start tonight's game together. They were reunited about 3-4 minutes into the second period and were played as such for the rest of the game. Vlasic and of course Brent Burns as well, but I'll point out Vlasic here in particular because I wasn't sure Brent Burns had that great of a game, especially with that giveaway on McKinnon. But Vlasic has been doing a great job of being able to really just keep to the perimeter, Landeskog, McKinnon, and Rantanen, because that's where they are the least dangerous, of course. I mean, in the offensive zone, they're always going to be able to make plays happen, but at least if you can keep them into the perimeter, the chances of a goal happening are a lot lower than if they can actually start moving around. Finally, I'll talk about maybe two lesser talked about San Jose Sharks, Barclay Goodrow and Melker Karlsson, who both had, usual solid games tonight. Rarely are they that bad. I mean, Barclay Goodrow, besides the game winner, of course, in Game 7 against the Golden Knights, was having a pretty rough game, that one. But I do have to commend them for the effort that they do put in, and it shows a lot of trust that Peter DeBoer has in these two players. Of course, they are a big part of the penalty kill, which has been mostly solid here against the Colorado Avalanche and against a tough Colorado Avalanche power play. But you also have to commend them for what they can do in the last couple minutes of the game. They are the two players with Couture, as of course he just stepped out of the penalty box, on the ice when Couture does get that empty netter, and it's some hard work by Barclay Goodrow and Melker Karlsson, not only in the defensive zone, but in the neutral zone, to be able to get this puck eventually to Logan Couture. So I do have to commend those two players, solid fourth liners for the San Jose Sharks, very, very good at what they can do. Goodrow, as we saw, sometimes contributing offensively. These are two players who are sometimes taking shifts over Lukas Radil later on in the game for that second line to give it a bit more of a defensive flair, and they were doing a decent job in that regard, at least defensively, just not offensively. So you do have to commend these two players when it comes to their defensive efforts, because they know that they're not huge role, necessarily big players on these teams. They know that they're not going to make any of the headlines, but they also know that they play a very important role, and if they don't play that role, well, the Sharks could be giving up power play goals, the Sharks could be giving up game tying goals later on. So they know what they do, and they do it rather well most of the time. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday. They will be once again in Denver in the Mile High City. It didn't seem to have too much of effect on them now. Tonight, I don't know. I mean, it would be hard to tell if the altitude actually did have much of an effect on them, but they will be playing in Denver once again. They'll try and take a 3-1 lead back to San Jose, which would be huge. A split right now is, of course, what the Sharks were hoping for, but the 2-0 is within their grasp. So, of course, now that's what they're going to be gunning for. The Avalanche are going to look to try and even this series up. Even if they don't have home ice anymore in this series, they will look to see if they can at least take it back tied in San Jose. Class dismissed.